Ya se ve, Rodrigo, ya se ve. Ya lo estoy viendo yo aquí. Perfecto. Good. Tiene un delay de segundos. Ahora lo que yo dije recién lo estoy escuchando, pero perfecto. So good. I think I'm going to mute it. A ver, where is the mute? Okay. Okay. Hi, Ceci.
Hi,
Hi. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for asking.
Good. So good evening, everyone. We'll just wait. It's not even time yet, but we will probably have to wait a couple of minutes until Agustina allows in other participants. Thank you. Hello. Well, thank you all for joining us today.
Okay. Hi, Sandra. You're welcome.
Hello. Yes, it's good to see you. Good to see you. Hello.
Yes, it's nice to see you too.
Thank you.
I'm glad to be invited to this meeting.
Oh, good. No, I mean, it's an honor that Carolina has
Yeah, for sure.
decided to join us. So we are all honored to be listening to her. Thank you.
Yeah. After the invitation, I saw the movie just to be a bit more aware
Yeah, okay.
about
It's,
Serge.
it's parts, yes, about surgeon, which is obviously a very important part. But Carolina has such broad experience and going to be an invaluable opportunity to talk to somebody who has had so much in her life, actually.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, really. And an incredible human being.
Okay. I bet.
Um, I'm happy to see that there are students um, also joining us today. Thank you guys to show interest and to take advantage of this opportunity. And I must say that even if we haven't started, just to let you out into this, that part of the COPSI members, other culturas from Argentina, will be joining us on the streaming. So we welcome them as well. Well, Agustina, are you admitting more people? You are. Okay, we shall wait a little bit. We shall wait one more minute.
Maybe 2 minutes and then we can start.
Okay, yeah, yes, because we'll probably be admitting other people as well. So 1 or 2 more minutes, that should do. Okay. Carolina, shall we get started? I'm going to introduce you. Yes, there we are. Okay. So let me first introduce the whole meeting. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us at this event. For those of you who might not know me, my name is Sandra Liotti, and I'm the head of studies at APSI, which is the Asociación Bahiense de Cultura Inglesa. Here at this meeting to co-host the talk is PhD Rodrigo Santos. Rodrigo is a member of the board of directors at APSI, and he's the person who acted as link between Miss Larriera and Cultura Inglesa. Also, let me say that we are sincerely thankful to Universidad Nacional del Sur for kindly hosting this meeting. And also we want to thank Ms. Agustina Jarvino here for her help running the video session and her reading the questions that I hope you're going to be posting on the Zoom chat or on the YouTube chat. I earnestly encourage all of you to ask questions that will eventually be answered by the speaker today. We are here today to learn about the life experience of a truly remarkable Bahiense who's come a long and certainly fruitful way. The flyer we sent over to invite you to this talk today went something like from Bahía Blanca to New York, with one stopover, Carolina's job as a United Nations official. This is intended to be a young woman's perspective of high diplomacy. It was a hard task to summarize all of Carolina's achievements in a one-liner, but we tried our best. Carolina started her career working for a hedge fund in Manhattan. She then moved to the United Nations headquarters in the information section. In 1999, she was called to join the UN nation building mission in East Timor as a project manager for economic projects and assisted in setting up the first ever Ministry of Finance. She left the day after independence. In 2003, she joined the UN political mission to Iraq to use the East Timor lessons learned, working and focusing on human rights projects to spur initiatives to advance the rights of women and reactivate the destroyed economy. Before joining DNDI, that's the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, as head of the Regional Support Office, she was a professor of international relations at the Pontificia Universidade Católica in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and INSPER in Sao Paulo. For the likes of me who didn't know what INSPER was, INSPER is a school of business, economics, and engineering in Sao Paulo, Brazil. She holds a degree in finance and economics from the City University of New York, a master's in international relations from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and a Mason Fellow and Masters of Public Administration at the Harvard Kennedy School, where she is now a teaching assistant on leadership and crisis. It is my pleasure to introduce you to the Master of Public Administration and Economics, Mrs. Carolina Larriera. On to you, Carolina.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Thanks a million. Thank you to everyone who is here today, listening to this conversation that we're going to be having, all of us. For me, it's really a privilege to be able to sit from the comfort of my home and be able to talk to all of you, you know, from the little boxes that are available in this setting, the best we can do, which is not bad, actually is pretty good. And I wanted to especially thank the Asociación Bahiense de Cultura Inglesa for this invitation. To me, this is something which is really close to my heart, as my father, many years ago, my father died 3 months before I was born. So I never met him, but he was one of the people who was planting the seeds for the ABCI. So the Cultura Inglesa was a common denominator as I was growing up in my house. It was equal or made memories of my own father. So it's been a constant, and I think that somewhere up there he's also listening, and he's also cheering that we are all together here talking about all the topics that we're going to be talking about today. I wanted to also thank everybody at the UNS who made this possible with the technology. Agustina for also helping putting this together, and a special thanks to you, Sandra, for having extended this invitation And most of all, to Rodrigo Santos, who was the one who reached out to me, who insisted, who was persistent, and who actually started putting together all the building blocks so this happened today. So thank you so much, Rodrigo. Thank you so much. It's many years. We won't say how many because I don't want to talk about numbers. Uh, but many years since I last saw you in person on the corridors of the Escuela Normal. So going on to what brings us all together here, perhaps what I would like to do would be to, if you allow me and if you agree, to kind of tailor this conversation in two pieces. The first piece would be more about what the United Nations is, just kind of to place us in that space. And then I won't be that long, and then just transition to my own experience working in that realm and what it meant. I guess, to the culmination of this movie that Bernardo spoke about watching yesterday. So perhaps what I would like to do is, if you make me co-host, I will share my screen. Let me see if I can do that. And let me see. And share my screen. Is that possible? Could I do that? Agustina, perhaps you are the boss here. Let me see.
I think you have to go hoster. Yes.
So first I need to be made co-host.
Co-host. Yes.
And then I'm able to share screen, I believe. There we go. Excellent. Fantastic. So let me see if I'll do that. I'll go here. I don't have any sound, so I'll start sharing this. Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about, especially in an environment where we are all very concerned about language, is the importance of language. And in diplomacy, language is extremely, extremely important because there is a real detail on what words are used, what purpose those words are used for, and the nuances of language. And when I was thinking about this, what came to mind was a mission that took place in 1980. And this picture that you have in front of us speaks to that mission. And that is a mission that was sent by President Carter to Iran to rescue some hostages. And the picture that we have, as you see, is that of a crashed helicopter. And when President Carter was asked to describe how the mission had gone, how the mission to rescue these hostages that had been taken by rebels in Iran, he did not call it a failure, as you can see perhaps by the crashed helicopter, but actually he called it an incomplete success, an incomplete success. Today we could say that perhaps the word would be a qualified success. So this tells us a little bit about, again, why language? Why language is so important, and why using the correct language, and especially in the realm of negotiations and in the realm of the sensitivities of dealing with countries, it plays such an important role. So when I was thinking about having this presentation in front of you, I was thinking about why I was invited, and then why the whole, this thing of internationality brings so much attention and brings so much curiosity among people. And I was thinking that this has to do perhaps because of the symbolic idea of what the United Nations is, and the symbolism of the words peace and its extension or its polar opposite, which is war. And war, as we all know it, it's been prevalent since the beginning of times. War and peace has a very long history. We know also of efforts to bring an end to war that from the Roman era, passing through the discussion of the balance of powers, the discussions around the Peloponnesian Wars, the Middle Ages, the formation of the Vienna Congress. Each one ended in conflict. And all these wars came to the beginning of last century, where there was a real big war known as the First World War. The First World War really caused a humongous loss of life and a huge conversion between governments, that there needed to be an international security system who would act as some sort of mechanism to prevent the world from further scourges of war. So the first idea, and here I bring this picture of Woodrow Wilson, came in 1917 when this prototype for the United Nations was put in place, which was a first kind of starting point on what this community of nations would be looking like. Woodrow Wilson came along with 17 points for what a federation of nations would be looking like. It was founded based on a set of ideals, on worthwhile ideals. Now, at the time, the world gravitated from a space of isolationism towards multilateralism, and that has been the case pretty much until this day. Well, we know that the League of Nations didn't last very long, or wasn't really effective. Actually, if we look at it, it lasted until 1944, but by the early 20s, it was really defunct. And what happened is that during Second World War, the next war that came along, there were talks of peace. And that's usually what happens. When there's a war, there's already talks of peace. And when there's peace, there's always talks about war. And here I brought this picture of Eisenhower and Churchill, where they had started to talk about, in this case, the Atlantic Treaty, which was one of the first seeds which were set in place for the United Nations. In this idea was, again, to have an international security system which would bring together the countries, so that there would be some sort of mechanism to prevent wars to happen, or to be activated before actual wars would actually take place. So we know the story that in 1945, in the Conference of San Francisco, 75 years ago, this year, 76 years ago, the prototype, the United Nations, was found. There were 51 members at the time, which were pretty much most democratic nations as were known then. If we go back to 1945, the world was still full of colonies. Some other countries called themselves neutral, even though they were not. And with that, I'm talking about Portugal, or I'm talking about Spain. The only real neutral one was Switzerland. But there were 51 nations, and Argentina was one of them. Brazil was another one of them. The U.S. was in. The U.S. had not been in the League of Nations. And this first idea came into fruition of having this organization with this primary goal of having an international security system. So this is the United Nations. I came and I brought along a picture of its principal organ, which is the General Assembly. Today, the United Nations is made up of 193, 94 countries. The last country that came into place was South Sudan in 2011. New countries become independent. They join the United Nations. Some countries still strive to be independent. They are not having luck. We can talk to Catalonia, and we can talk to Kosovo, and their wishes to be part of this community of nations. Aside from the General Assembly, its principal organ, or organ where the decisions are made, is the Security Council, the UN Security Council, which has 5 permanent members with veto power, plus 10 other rotating members. So the total of the members are 15. And this is the chamber of the Security Council. And again, perhaps there's all this interest because it's been very much in the history of the characters that we have known for the past 75 years, and many characters, in this case, Nikita Khrushchev, and an episode that it is not really known today whether the second picture is the real picture of him taking off his shoes and banging on the desk when he was making his speech was actually a fake or not. At the time, we didn't have video or live cameras. We don't really know whether that's actually what he did. But it's a tradition that when heads of state in Oriental powers want to make a statement, they go and they use their shoes, and that's supposed to mean that that they're really angry for not saying other things. So the United Nations is a very, very, very complex organization, and when I was employed, and I'm gonna slowly gravitate towards that space of my presentation today. I worked in what is known as the Secretariat, which is right here. And the Secretariat, as you see in this whole system, has a lot of functions and departments. And I started my career here at the Department of Public Information, but I quickly shifted to another department, which is the Department of Peace Operations, or Peacekeeping Operations, which is the one that manages the UN's operations around the world. So it's right here in this area down here. So as you see, it's just one part of this huge system, which employs about 50,000 people around the world. So I wanted to quote here Dag Hammarskjöld, who was one of the early Secretary Generals of the organization, which a very much beloved Secretary General, who stated once, the UN was not created to take mankind to heaven, but actually to save humanity from hell. And this is very important to think when we think about the activities of the organization around the world. Dag Hammarskjöld himself was killed in Katanga, a rich province of the Congo, in namely an accident. But until today, we don't have answers, or we don't have clear, there was never a clear investigation of what really happened, or actually on whose toes that Hammarskjöld really stepped into in order for to suffer this accident. So, and here is what we call the Secretariat. This is the main building of the United Nations. It's in New York City, in Manhattan, on 42nd and First Avenue. And this is a place where I used to work. This is the place where I was first hired to work. I used to work on the second floor right there. And for your information, the offices of the Secretary General are on the 38th floor. So they are high up, right on the tippy top of the building. The building is made up of 40 floors, and it's overlooking the East River. And here is where the main decisions are made around the world. There was a big discussion of where the headquarters of the United Nations should be. And incredibly or not, it was actually, there were several places that were up for grabs. One place was to have the headquarters of the UN in Germany, in Bonn. Another one was, of course, in the US, in San Francisco. And then also Switzerland, because it had housed before the League of Nations, had exerted its claim that it should be actually in Geneva, in the same site of the League of Nations. But it was actually Russia who said that no, the United Nations should be in the new world, in the modern world, equidistant from all the powers, and not in the old world, which was in Europe, much to the dismay of the Swiss. So the office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which is what Sergio used to be before he was killed, is today, or inhabits today, the palace, Palais Wilson, which is actually the former palace of the League of Nations. So again, these buildings are still being used, but the main headquarters of the UN, the United Nations, is housed in New York City out of a donation by a billionaire at the time, David Rockefeller, who donated the space. And there is where this building, which was considered modern at the time, was built from the scratch up. So I wanted to start with that kind of bird's view of the United Nations to start to tell you a little bit about my career, actually I will just show you one more. Two more, and then I'll transition to the second part, which is that aside from the work in New York City, the real work of the organization is out there in the field, out there in the places which are in the margins of the developed nations, of the rich nations, and where the true conflicts take place. And there is where the true work of the United Nations takes place, usually through the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, which is another way to call these operations which take place after a war. And the organization relies on troops that are given voluntarily by member nations. For instance, this is a picture of Haiti, and the troops that were allocated to Haiti belonged to Brazil. The force commander was Brazilian. So here we see somebody from the military in Brazil, doing the peace observing and peace maintenance activities of the United Nations. Another of the main tasks of the UN is to be able to house or provide for transitional spaces for places where migrations have taken place, especially refugees, to mitigate to mitigate risks and to mitigate suffering from those who have been forced to abandon their homes and have no longer a place to stay. And the UN has know-how on how to make these transitions in an efficient way. So with that introduction, a bit long, I'm sorry for talking so much, I will transition to myself and kind of link it to the title of this presentation, which is that I am from Bahía Blanca. My family is from Bahía Blanca. I'm a product of our community. And my family is intertwined with cultura inglesa. And it makes me very proud to be able to be here today. My mom is here listening as well. I had the great vision from my family, from my mother, to enable me to study English from early on and actually be able to get the tools. Perhaps if I have that say that there's one element in my education which actually made the difference was the ability to be able to learn English as a second language. And that single ability was the single most ability that actually enabled me to be able to expand the frontiers that I had available to me in ways that nothing else provided me for. So that is it, that when I was 18, I finished high school, same high school as Rodrigo. I did this thing where if I studied in the summer and I asked to be transitioned from the Escuela Normal to the Colegio Nacional, I did not have to do one more year, so I could actually finish my education in the summer. So I spent all, as my girlfriends were all, having fun in Montermoso, I stayed back and I was, studying here in Bahía Blanca. And I did my last year for free, or basically I took the exams. And I was off for a year, and my mother said, okay, now Carolina, you've studied so much, you've been so great, I'm gonna give you as a in reward for your sacrifice, I'm gonna give you the chance to study abroad. And she gave me as a reward a ticket to go to the US to visit some relatives that we had in New York City. So one thing led to the other, and I spoke the language, but I was shy, and I felt that I had not been in an environment where people spoke English fluently. So I was like very, self-aware of my limitations, and I've always been very proud of doing things well. So I didn't want to make any mistakes. So I was always very shy at making mistakes. So that actually hindered me from exposing myself and putting myself out there. So I had to work through all that in order to be comfortable with not doing things right and making mistakes, and maybe other people making fun of me because I had an accent. But through withstanding that living in that discomfort is that slowly I was able to get comfortable and get better at making myself understood. I took some classes, and eventually one thing led to the other, and I started doing. I started going to university. My initial plan was to come back to Argentina and join my brother, who was in Buenos Aires studying law. Because the idea was that I first would go from Bahía Blanca to Buenos Aires and then from Buenos Aires somewhere else. But what I did is I first, from Bahía Blanca, I went to New York, and then I said, well, from New York, I'm going to come back to Buenos Aires. But actually, I never went to Buenos Aires. Just said, I'm just going to stay in New York. And I had no trouble at all. The only trouble was to be able to trust myself and have confidence in myself and be comfortable at making mistakes, not big mistakes, but little mistakes, and still go on with confidence. And I think being able to stand on your confidence, it's important. And it's also important that if you feel that you are grounded in the right place and you have a purpose, and my purpose was to make the most of my dream and to be able to achieve my dream of having my education and be able to progress in life, then I was on the right place. So of course, it was very expensive to go to school, to go to university, and my family couldn't pay for it. So I started working as a nanny, looking after children. That was a skill that was very much in need, and it was a little niche that I was able to find. And basically, I would work 10 hours a day, and then I would rock the baby to sleep. And at 8:15 I had class, so I would dash out, take a subway, and go to school. It was not the best school in New York. There are better schools than the first school I went to, but it was a school I could afford with my salary. And at the same time, what I would do is I would volunteer myself to volunteer positions that became available. And the first volunteer position that I was able to see in my environment was working for a professor of mine in finance, which was my career. I chose finance and economics because I didn't have any money, and I felt that the only way to figure out what to do in the city of finance was to study finance and to figure out how to better manage my money. So that's why I became an economist. Through a professor of mine at school is that I found my first job in the private sector, which was in finance and banking. Quickly, I realized that yes, it was great. It's a great world, and following a career in finance, you can make a lot of money. But I felt that my purpose wasn't there. My purpose, the thing that I wanted for my life, wasn't there. I wasn't really sure what it was yet, but definitely it wasn't there. And then what happened is that I, every morning as I used to go to work, I would pass in front of this building, the Secretariat of the UN, this big shoebox, blue shoebox. And whenever I would pass by, I would see all these people, dressed in all these, funky colored dresses and wearing big hats, and people from India and people from Africa, and these very powerful women. And I said, I want to be one of them. I want to be one of those how do I do this? So I remember that just one day I passed by and I said, let me go find out, maybe they take volunteers. And I found out, and yes, indeed, they had this program for volunteers. So they took me in, and once a week I would volunteer. So cutting a long story short, so eventually when I graduated from school, when I finished my degree in finance, I had to decide whether I was going to continue working in economics and finance in the hedge fund, or whether I would go on with my career in the UN, where I was also offered a position because I had an experience of being a volunteer. And I decided that my place, was better served within the United Nations. So that's when I made the transition. And I joined the United Nations. I joined that place that was aligned with my purpose and my fire. So I worked in the Secretariat in the Shoebox building in the second floor in the Department of Public Information. And from there, I realized that the work of information was fantastic. It's great. It's a great work because you get to know everything about everyone, everything that is going on around the world. But there's one caveat about being a journalist or working in information. The caveat is that you report on the work of others. That's not your work. You tell the stories of others. You tell the stories of other people are making, but it's not your own. And I remember that people would come to me and they would hug me and they say, wow, this is fantastic work that you're doing. And I felt like a fool. I felt like a cheat, because it wasn't I doing the work. I was just taking credit for their work, but it wasn't mine. And I knew that. I knew it. And maybe they didn't realize or didn't understand what it meant, but I knew, and it didn't sit right. So the first opportunity that I had came into being in 1999. So for this, during the 90s, after the Iron Wall collapsed and the USSR, the Soviet Union, fell apart, there was a new surge there was a new world emerging, and a new set of clients, to speak in modern language, for the United Nations. So all of a sudden, a lot of cultures, to call them in a way, that had been under the aegis of the Soviet Union became had the opportunity to become independent. And the 90s was marked by all these countries coming on their own. Come 1999, I was in the United Nations, and there was an opportunity there were several conflicts going on. One was Kosovo, another one was Ethiopia, Eritrea. And then I said, well, this is my opportunity. Enough of New York. I had it here. Nothing is going here. We are just pushing paper. I heard that this was going on, and I said, well, this is my opportunity. And I remember sending my CV to DPKO, the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, which was one of the departments that I showed you about. And I got a phone call and I said, well, we want to interview. And I was like, oh my God, excellent. At that time, I knew everything about the Balkans. I knew everything about what was going on in Kosovo. I was speaking a little bit of Serbo-Croatian. It was fantastic. And then I called and I said, oh, this is fantastic. I'm going to go to Kosovo. This is the place I always dreamt about going. And after the interview, I'm told, yes, this is great. So next week we're sending you to East Timor. And I'm like, East Timor? isn't it that I'm going to Kosovo? And no, you actually, we already sent a lot of people to Kosovo. So now we have a new conflict, and the new conflict is in East Timor. And you're going there because, you are from South America, and over there they're speaking Portuguese, and it's going to be good for you because the language is kind of similar. So we don't need you for Kosovo. You go to East Timor. I didn't even know where East Timor was in the map, but I was sent there. And that was my first experience with going in the field. That was my first experience with being out there where the conflict is, where the real pain and the real face of the organization lies. So I know that recently a movie was made and is today on Netflix. The movie is called Sergio. Sergio was my spouse, and the movie is about him. And as Bernardo mentioned that he saw the movie yesterday, and I know that Sandra saw it as well, and I guess also Rodrigo. I wanted to say that there's a little bit of the story from then on that some of you may know. And even though the story is, it's fiction based on fact, yet fiction in the end. What I wanted to say is that it's a good way to bring again to the foreground a story that is important to be told, and a story which is important to be told because I think it's an empowering story that empowers, empowers Sergio and empowers the work that he did, the career that he had in so many post-conflict places. And empowers perhaps me as well, somebody who came from Bahía Blanca, and with the elements that she gathered from our community was also to perhaps make her contribution to some change in some places where that little change made all the difference. So in East Timor was a place that had been forgotten around the world. It had been a former Portuguese colony, which had failed to gain its independence in the 1970s, when Mozambique, Angola, Cabo Verde, and other former Portuguese colonies had become independent. Timor was invaded by its neighbor, by Indonesia, and forcibly assimilated. And where there ensued was a 30-year civil war. And in 1999, because of a truce that had been engineered by the United Nations, there was a transition to independence. To explain you in simple words, it would be as if Catalonia, to give an example which is close to home, as if Catalonia would become the independent nation of Catalonia. Catalonia, a province or a state within Spain, would today become an independent nation and would have its own flag, its own passport, its own national anthem, its own international borders, its own prime minister. And this would happen with East Timor. And that transition from province to independent nation, from province to the 191st member of the United Nations, took place over 3 years. I left East Timor on the 21st of May, 2002. Why? Because independence was on the 20th of May, and staying one more day could be confused with the UN becoming a colonial power and staying on and potentially being misunderstood for what it was there for. That success of East Timor made it that when 9/11 came along, and 9/11 then was used as a catalyst for the war in Iraq, that our team was also called to be the team that was to be deployed in Iraq in 2003. We did not want to go to Iraq, and we acceded to go to Iraq because of a lot of pressure that the UN was put under, especially from our bosses. And eventually we went to Iraq to be aligned with our purpose, to be aligned with the purpose that I believed, the purpose that I felt, that was to do what I wanted to do, what was aligned with my internal fire. And in Iraq, 4 months into our mission, we were bombed by a suicide bomber who broke into our building and blew himself up. And there I lost Sergio, my spouse, together with 21 of my friends and co-workers. After that, I left the organization. I came back to the region. I settled in Brazil, and I founded an organization, the Sergio Vieira de Melo Center, which is based out of Brazil. And since then, I've been working with the organization, which works to bring diplomacy to a wider spectrum of people, especially youth, who want to use the elements of diplomacy, but on a lower level, or basically the basic inputs of diplomacy to which are resolution of conflict, negotiation, and perhaps etiquette, to solve problems which are in their own communities. And I wanted to share one more time my screen and bring you to this, which is a word which I have been using a lot today. And I started this conversation today by highlighting the importance of language, how important language is. Language is key. Today we talk about a lot of things, and we talk about there's several movements around the world about Black Lives Matter, white privilege, and I would say that there's another word which is language privilege. And I would say that today the world goes around or turns around language privilege, and the language of privilege in our world is English. There's no doubt that the world of privilege, the language of privilege is English. And that is a fact, as much as the sun will rise tomorrow. So it's not whether it's right or whether it's wrong, it's a fact. If you know English, you have access to that world of privilege. If you don't know English, you are outside. And it's very, very, very important to be inside this space, because it's a space where people who sometimes are born out of privilege have that because they are born. Us, we need to learn it. We need to learn it. But once we learn it, we have both. We have a native language and we have one more language. So we expand our horizon of our toolkits of elements. And because we talk about language and we talk about meaning, one word that I mentioned today was a word of purpose. And for me, purpose is very important, because purpose comes from the Indo-European root, which is per. Per means fire. Per means fire. So you need to know what your purpose in life is, what your propósito. It's very important to know what your purpose is. If you are standing on your purpose and you know what your purpose is, then you're right, and you're standing on the right place, because it's linked to your internal fire. If you're not standing in your purpose, you're standing in somebody else's. So that's why you need to be connected to your own. And here I wanted to bring a poem that I took from Rumi, which I think is also aligned to that idea of purpose and internal fire and knowing where you sit. And it says that everyone has been made for some particular work, and the desire for that work has been put in every heart. Let yourself be silently drawn by the stronger pull of what you really love. Let me say it again. Let yourselves be silently drawn by the stronger pull of what you really love. And I say this because I felt that I found my purpose, and I found that pull of what I really loved. And by finding that, I also encountered another world, which is a world of diplomacy. And with this, I think it was fit to end the talk today. And I wanted to draw you with this to this image, to this painting by Robin. This painting is called The Ambassadors. And we see this painting of two ambassadors, which are actually the two ambassadors of France being sent to where? To London. These ambassadors definitely spoke English. But what's more interesting about this painting is that these two ambassadors are each one, or at least one of them, holding one of them actually, the one on the left is the ambassador. The one on the right is a father, is the envoy from the Vatican. The one on the left is holding a dagger. And if we see on the dagger, it's inscribed some numbers and some messages. What the dagger actually says is his age. If we read up close, we see right here that we have the number of 29. The guy was 29. So that kind of speaks about the ephemeral nature of ambassadors at that time, where life was not long, but was very short. Sometimes because of the cloak and dagger nature of diplomatic type of work. Another element that this picture has is the element of the guitar. And one of the things that we see in the guitar is that one of the strings is cut. The guitar, which is the element of conversation and the element of diplomacy that unites segments in society through music and through language, is broken. Because as in a symbolism that perhaps diplomatic relations or the relations between the nations are at a moment of negotiation and perhaps of stress, where one of the strings, but not all of them, has been cut. So I want to conclude with this image, which I think is the perfect symbolism of the importance of diplomacy, the importance and the ephemeral nature of life, of the difficulty sometimes of dialogue, as what Iraq means in the UN, in my own life, in the movie that you have seen, and the importance of communications, and communications, at least from my experience, in in expanding our toolkit of languages, to me, the importance of having learned English, to be able to expand my toolkit of abilities and be able to inhabit more areas. So with this, I want to pass the floor to you, to all of you, to tell me what your questions are, what inquiries you may have, and pass you the floor for your observations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carolina. I really hope the audience will post their questions on the chat if they do not want to open their microphones. Of course, you can, and you can request to talk, and we will obviously allow, or else you can post your questions should you have any. But while the audience does that, let me tell you that everything has been really very clear and enthusing. You know, I mean, your passion really comes alive in your talk, and really to find one's purpose in life is probably all we seek. All of us seek that. And it is a great message for our students, should they be listening to it, because in this half year and the year that we passed, it was really very hard to find, you know, to hear your voice, to pursue your voice or your calling. And perhaps this is the kind of message that we need to give to young people, that if you keep at it, you actually get it. You went through very rough times when you were a kid and you were learning, and you had to make real big efforts to get where you wanted. And you're proof that if you actually keep at it, you eventually get it. So thank you for sharing that. And here there's a question. Actually, two people have asked pretty similar questions, which is, what are your plans now? I mean, where are you heading for?
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Cynthia has made that question. Georgina as well. Thank you, Monica, also for being here, and for everybody for having been here. Well, I think that, you know, COVID has been terrible for all of us, has been a disaster. But with every disaster, there's always, you know, there's a silver lining, how we say, right? So the big challenge is, within the disaster, is there anything that you can take and make it and take advantage of, or actually turn the table around and make it work for you? So I will tell you that for me, the silver lining of the quarantine has been the ability of being able to come back home, right? To be back in Bahía Blanca. And I hadn't been here for many, many, many years. And, you know, and it's been a unique opportunity. I think if it hadn't been for COVID, it would have been extremely difficult to find the excuse to be close to the loved ones, close to my family, close to the relations, close to my city, close to the place where I belong. And again, kind of value again, you know, the things that are, you know, within the city, which when I was little, you know, I wasn't able to value, I wasn't able to they were there. And I didn't, they were there, you know. And I always
for granted.
Well, I took them for granted. And I would say this, people who live in New York City, people who live in Manhattan, they never go and visit the Statue of Liberty. Why? Because it's there. You know, it will always be there. It's a statue, right? So people from New York City, they never go to the Statue of Liberty. Now, when we go to New York City, the first thing we do is, let's go to visit the Statue of Liberty. So here's the same. In Bahía Blanca, it's exactly the same. You have Montermoso 1 hour away, you have Sierra de la Ventana 1 hour away, you have Guamini, you have these fantastic areas so close nearby. And we never go there, or we go not as, we don't take full advantage of them because they're there. They'll always be there. So what if would be more deliberate and giving value and exploring more and um, you know, leaving no stones unturned of this place where we live, examine and um, 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 explore it more for everything it has to give, because we are really in a privileged part of the country. We have so much. We have so much which we don't really appreciate because we are so much looking at the neighbors, whether the neighbors' grass is greener than ours, that sometimes we don't give value. So if there's any silver lining to COVID, there's a silver lining to COVID, I would say that it is that saying of having the opportunity to kind of reconnect to the basics, and to me to reconnect to my foundations, which is to have been able to come back home.
And here, Heike, I think it's Heike. I'm sorry, I don't know if it is pronounced correctly, but she's a student from Cultura Bahía Blanca, and she says that she's taken part of the UN model here twice already, and she loved it. And she thinks that every day is an opportunity for doing what you love, perhaps in line with what you were saying. Perhaps you don't have to actually look out for something outside your realm, but actually do something for the place where you are. And I suppose it's got to do with Ike was saying. And there's another person who is saying here. She is Catalina is asking where you are living now. Well, now you're in Bahía Blanca, but where would be home for you?
Where would be home for me? That's a big question. Well, so home is where you live. Who says where home is, right? You could have several homes. So I lived in many countries. And in every country where I lived, I met some extraordinary people. And I feel that with each people, I have developed some bonds which I never want to relinquish. So I have a special bond with my city, which is Bahía Blanca, because it represents family, because it represents nature, my nature. I have also a bond with Brazil, with Rio de Janeiro, because it represents to me regeneration. A lot of things have had to do with regeneration. I also have a bond with New York, because it was a place where I learned that that things are possible if you have the will, that there's no limits if you have the will. But I believe that it is in Bahía Blanca where I also learned that it all depends on yourself. It depends on me, and that the only boundaries are the self-imposed boundaries. And I like to think that also I have many homes, and that I don't have those boundaries. That I can inhabit many places, and I think even Zoom has made it possible to kind of mentally be in different places, and technology has made it that you can be anywhere where you decide to be, and that you don't need to be really anchored in a single home.
Thank you.
Have some limits. Some limits can be language, some limits can be physical presence. But when we had to be quarantined, home is a state of mind.
Good, thank you. Good insight. And then there's Valen Garcia who says, good evening. Thank you for your talk. I would like to know I would like to follow into your steps. You're such an inspiration. What would you suggest to me to be a diplomatic? What's a good piece of advice from Carolina?
Valen, thank you so much for your question. This is a very important question, actually. And I think it's a question that a lot of people that are here today perhaps are wondering about, and maybe they're shy to ask. So it's good that you actually are posing that question. I would say that the diplomatic career has there's two ways to go about it. On one hand, you have national diplomacy, which is, for instance, the diplomatic corps of Argentina, which is undertaken through the ISEN, through the National School of Diplomacy, which is like a master's degree that you undertake after you finish your first degree. Then you go and you enter the ISEN through an exam, and then you become a diplomat that represents the interests of Argentina, of the national country. In each country of the world, each member of the 194 members of the United Nations has its own diplomatic corps. And in New York City, where the UN headquarters is, they have what is called the mission of country XX to the United Nations, the mission of Argentina to the United Nations, the mission of Russia to the United Nations, the mission of Israel to the United Nations. But then there is another diplomatic career, a parallel diplomatic career, which is the career within the United Nations, which basically the United Nations is an organization. Its main body is that blue building that I showed the picture of, that blue building. And there's a career within the United Nations where you or each person that works for the United Nations do not represent the interests of their own national country, but they represent some global interests, like interests related to the environment, or interests related to the empowerment of women, or interests related to the rights of the indigenous populations, or interests related to children, like UNICEF. And then the UN has specialized agencies, as you know, or those who have actually experienced the model United Nations. You probably know how the UN has these specialized agencies that focus on certain themes, specific themes, like the environment, which is in Nairobi, UNICEF, which is based in New York City, refugees, UNHCR, where Sergio worked for 20 plus years, which deals with refugees. And those are called United Nations diplomats, because even though in order to have this, in order to really defend these higher interests, these international interests, what's very important is to have a wide representation of nationalities. Each individual doesn't represent their own interests. They don't represent, like when I was a UN diplomat, I did not represent the interests of Argentina. However, I brought in all my education and all my mindset from Argentina, which is very important, which is key, because our experience as Argentines with dealing with poverty, or dealing with inflation, or dealing with scarcity is not the same as someone who comes from, say, Germany and needs to understand poverty. how can you understand inflation unless you lived inflation? And it's very hard to explain inflation to somebody, or the deprivation created by inflation, unless you lived it. So that's why it's essential that organizations that deal with international issues, like the Secretariat in New York, like UNICEF, like UNFPA, like UNHCR, like OHCHR for human rights, so many of them have diplomats that are recruited from around the world. So Valen, that was such a fantastic question.
And thank you, Carolina. Georgina wants, I mean, it's a long question. I'll just read. It says, what do you think of all those civil wars taking place within countries, with so many citizens being killed simply for not being the right type of Muslim, or not having the right color of skin, or not being in agreement with whatever dictator they have? External interference has pros and cons, but these people may have no other protection otherwise. Don't know if it's clear, the thing. I think it's more of a statement than a question, but
I think it's a very important statement. And perhaps I see Georgina, who is here.
Yeah.
Can I invite Georgina to read the question?
Yeah, all right.
If willing. Georgina? I see Georgina's picture, but I'm not sure if she is.
Actually, Georgina is not in Argentina. She, I think, she might have problems connecting. That's why she posted the question.
Okay, okay.
I think she's located in Wales, and but anyway, perhaps she can make this clear if she can connect.
No, you know, external interference has pros and cons, but these people may have no other protection otherwise. So this may sound like a technical answer, but I'm gonna place it out there in any case, which is to say that the work of the UN is limited and needs to be limited, because the idea is to move in a territory for a limited period of time until to provide that protection during the crisis segment of the problem or the war, and that the crisis is understood to have a starting point and an ending point. So, so the interventions need to be targeted and short. And the idea is to strengthen or to give the tools so that intervention is spot on, limited, and has a purpose in mind, which is to strengthen the actors, which are the ones whose purpose is the long-term stability of a nation. So definitely that leads to a wide discussion, because what we have seen in recent times is that through the tool of interventions, many countries have actually invaded for other purposes, other countries, and taken away their resources. So that's where the political element of the United Nations comes into place. And for those of you who have read the Samantha Power book, or who have actually watched the movie, they say, you know, I highlight is fiction, based on some facts, but not all the facts. But in in big terms, there are some, the political items, the political message is right, the political message is right, is that there are limitations to intervention and that interventions can be manipulated. And that's why I ended with that picture of the ambassadors with the dagger, because what we see very much that many times interventions are misused and mismanaged.
Okay, thank you. Georgina, have you been able to connect? Nope. Maybe you want to add something. No, I can still see her, but probably she cannot unmute and talk. And then there's another question from, I suppose it's from YouTube, Mariana Diaz Luna. She says, I don't know if we can ask some questions, but I would like to ask if you had some international English exam in the US to prove your language skills to get the job, and how was your experience? Jumping off to another thing. You know, the big leap. Okay.
Definitely, to go into university in the US, you need to undertake the TOEFL exam, the TOEFL examination. In the UK, you have other ones. For any university, you'll be requested to have those examinations, which are standard examinations that are designed to test whether you have the proficiency in order to be able to engage other students and engage in the conversation. And it's important to have those examinations. Again, those are requirements, technical requirements, but are very important to meet those requirements. Interestingly enough, I will also say that the UN, the United Nations, also has exams. There are 6 official languages within the United Nations. That's a lot of money to translate, you can imagine. And one of the freebies that come in the United Nations is that you can, within the organization, you can take classes of every language. And then if you pass an exam, you get a plus on your salary for speaking extra languages. So there's all these incentives for you to speak other languages, and and those languages are the languages of the powers that won World War II in 1945, which is Russia. Well, actually, Russia and English, French, but then also Chinese, Arabic, and and Spanish, of course. And I wanted to say something also that what's interesting is that just a thing about language. I think language is very important because there's been an evolution on the language of diplomacy. Things evolve, things change, and they will continue to change. And we saw that until half of last century, the language of choice in diplomacy was French. The language that our parents and our grandparents would learn would be French. French was the international language, and it remains so for a long time. But slowly, as we transitioned into a bipolar world and then a unipolar world in the 90s, and actually, after 1945, with the US becoming a hegemon, the curve of languages started swerving towards English. And we can say that, yes, because the US was more important and it was, an economic superpower. But I have to say as well, it's because English, it's the easiest language. It's much easier than French. It's much easier than Spanish. It has less declinations. It's a language of choice. It's a language of choice because it's not hard to learn. It's easy to learn. And I say this because I remember that when I was learning French, in my head, I had this, I was stuck. I was complaining a lot about French. I did not like French. I was stuck on the French, and somebody said to me, Carolina, stop complaining. French is easy. French is just like Spanish. So stop complaining. And I suddenly I kind of woke up and I said, right, it's not so hard. And suddenly when I said to myself, it's easy, suddenly that language became easy. And I always say that to people learning English, that the difficulties and the walls that we place are obstacles that we place ourselves. We tell ourselves things are difficult, but they are really not. They are simple.
And
The walls are
now they are more accessible, right? It's like the world has become flatter and closer, definitely. Sorry, Carolina, here's another question. Did you give up the UN because you were disappointed, or rather they let you down? Oh gosh.
That's an excellent question. Who made that question?
Monica, Monica Laura.
Monica, that's a fantastic question. I would say that the answer is both. I would say that the answer is both. I was let down, absolutely. I was definitely let down. I felt that at that level of high diplomacy, the ideals become tokens of exchange, and I could not live with that, and I did not feel that those who had gone to Iraq who to defend the ideals of the blue flag and who had actually exposed themselves to such a dangerous mission because they believed in those ideals and they took it to that level and so far could have been shortchanged by political horse trading back in New York, which is actually what happened. And I felt that I had to be up to the principle that I believed in. I could not fail to ignore that, especially when people had given up their most precious thing, which is their lives. When Sergio died, I felt it was a thing of principle that I needed to do to make a statement, and that the statement I could make was to leave. That was the strongest statement that I could make. And definitely I was let down. I was disappointed. But I'm not disappointed at the ideals. Ideals are valid. The ideals are worth living for. It's how people implement those ideals. When the ideals of the UN are spot on, they are legitimate ideals, and those ideals are worth fighting for. The problem is when the bureaucrats use those ideals to advance their individual interests. And that's when we need to call out those bureaucrats so they line with the ideals and they don't stray aside. Because there are people who are willing to uphold those ideals. And I continue to uphold those ideals from my space, from a different space today. But I continue to uphold, and I continue to call those who horse trade in the wrong way for doing that.
Thank you. Well, here's Valen, the one who is going to follow into your steps. She says she apologizes, but she has to leave. And she thanks you enormously for an enriching talk and the wonderful opportunity of sharing it. And there's one other from Rodrigo, who, I'm sorry, I scrolled it down. here. Rodrigo asks, do you believe there's a glass ceiling, a barrier that prevents women from advancing towards top positions in the UN?
Well, Sandra, Agustina, Carla, Marisa, Mónica, Lucia, Gabriela, Cynthia, I think you all know, you think all
we
know
do.
how hard it is and how we are pushed to do things twice, get double degrees, work, harder, prove ourselves 3 times just to get the same level of access, the same level of salary, the same level of be taken seriously,
Mhm.
or be even invited at the table.
Mhm.
Just how hard it is to get invited to the conversation table, and how hard it is to have to go and get your own chair, and ask for space to sit on the table because you know that it's not going to be offered to you. And after you do that, then you are criticized because you were not too nice, or you were not too sweet, or you were not too feminine. And we women never get it. We we women are continuously criticized for everything we do. Um, so I think it's a long it's a long walk. It didn't start with this generation. It didn't start with the generation of our mothers. I think it was our grandmothers who were burning their bras, and calling for, no? Uh, and Marisa is smiling. Agrees with me. Monica also.
It's a very gradual success, it's kind of, drop by drop, but definitely it did start way
Yeah.
many years ago.
And I think that we continue to need support like Bernardo's, who smile and they seem to be on our side. And I think it's more and more important to have the support of men, men who understand, who are curious, who stay, who will give us support, who listen to our voice, to people like Rodrigo, who call and serve as the glue and the opener of doors of showing the way. So we are grateful for men who provide that space, and we wish for more to come and join this path that it still needs to be continued to walk.
Yeah, I think it is something we will do either together or it will not really happen. Because the thing is that, I suppose. And well, here, this is Georgina saying apologies. She's on her phone. Obviously, it's really very late back where she's living and everyone is asleep. So she doesn't want to wake up the whole family if she starts talking, but she's listening and she's happy with the answer. And she comments this: the devastation we see around the world is shocking, and we see this daily, and one cannot stop wonder where does the international community fit. That's why I asked your opinion. Sorry, I could not be on video or even talk, but she's satisfied with the answer. And then there's Martina, who asks, do you know what are the requirements for entering the UN, or if there are any requirements to enter?
Well, I will make a comment to the first question, and then I will answer.
Sorry,
yes. Just a little comment on the state of the world. It's interesting where we're heading, in the sense that we see the myriad of vaccines, we see the North being vaccinated and the South having trouble to get access. And this is not new. This is something that before COVID, the same problem was there. Now it's more acute, but before 2000, there were diseases like malaria, there were Chagas disease diseases that exist for hundreds of years, at least malaria does. Chagas was decoded in the 1920s. But still today, there are no vaccines for that. There's no pill that you take and actually you can get inoculated for malaria, and there's no shot for Chagas. So these are why are the diseases not eradicated? Why? Because they affect the poor people, and there's no incentives for the big companies, big pharma, the big pharmaceutical companies, to develop drugs for the poor, because the poor cannot pay. So there's no incentives. So now this about COVID is a little bit like antiretrovirals in the 1990s, where AIDS was hitting also as much the poor as well as the rich. And because it was also hitting the rich, is that there was a lot of R&D devoted to developing new antiretrovirals to cure HIV. Same thing with COVID. There was a rush, and the US invested with this Operation Warp Speed to fund, to put the whole system into provide a vaccine for the whole nation. That's how Pfizer, which is heavily financed by the US Treasury, developed in warp speed the vaccine. And that's why in the US today, it's engaged into vaccine tourism, because everybody from the US who is not yet vaccinated is because they are vaccine naysayers or they are vaccine deniers, but not because it's not available. And while in the developing world, including our country, we are begging for doses to come in a timely way, and that's very sad. And it seems that this polarization is only deepening, and it's getting worse. It's not getting better. Yes, there's COVAX. There's a system which is sponsored by the UN, but it's too slow, and it's not free. It's only a way to negotiate the price. To negotiate prices a little bit lower. So maybe we'll be able to afford them, but there are countries like East Timor or countries in Africa that cannot afford it. So unless those vaccines are made for free, they will never get vaccinated. And because we know that COVID is an international problem that will affect everybody through tourism all the time, it's urgent. The solution needs to be found. So that's the first for the first question. For the second question, yes, there are. So for the UN and for the agencies. So I explained earlier on to Van that while that diplomatic route was to represent some international ideas or world ideals, and it was necessary to have then the representation from a big basket of nationalities. There is still an exam because the organization works with weights. So every country needs to be represented, but some countries are overrepresented and some other countries are underrepresented. So what happens is that there's an exam that is only available for countries that are underrepresented. So basically that higher that there are not enough nationalities of that country represented working for the organization. So you need to check online whether, for instance, you know, the nationalities that you hold, Argentina and perhaps others, whether they are available, and go through that. But I would say that also there are other ways to get into this international realm. That is not only with the UN and its agencies, UNICEF or UNFPA or UNHCR, but the international world is it's a huge world. And there's a bunch of NGOs, of big, interesting international NGOs that you should also look into. That they don't have per se an exam, but they do this fantastic this fantastic type of work around the world. And these are organizations like Oxfam, Save the Children, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, so many of them, MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, Médecins du Monde, international. Each country also has an international cooperation agency that also hires international staff for their positions. So that international world is much more than the UN. The UN is just one actor within this big sphere, if you want to say.
Yeah, we have, even the UN is becoming globalized. Okay, means the task they do is undertaken by other organizations, and well, it's in good time, I guess. Marisa Izaguirre asks a question that is linked to this. Perhaps can you tell us about your current job in Brazil, or how is it different from what you did when you worked for the UN? Is it actually different from, I mean, because you are doing also some kind of service, as I understood, that was like aligned to what you were doing at UN. So the question goes there, I guess.
So I wear different hats and I do different things. So I occupy different spaces and places. While I continue my work in advocacy, what I also do is taking what I learned, the tools that I acquired in the United Nations, I take it to be applied in another sphere, in another realm, which is to empower those who do not have access to education or do not have access to these tools that were available to me, because I learned the language of negotiations, I learned the language of listening, I learned the language of understanding the needs of others, if you want to say. That sometimes what you need is, in order to build bridges, sometimes in a community that is ravaged by drugs and drug trade, what you need is empower some youth so they learn another type of language, and that they understand that there's a different type of purpose that they can use to seek a different future than the future that sometimes is given in these communities that very much are on the margins of society. And you see that a lot. You see that a lot in Brazil. You see that a lot in Argentina. You don't have to go very far. And it's important that I think an element that is very, very important is to teach how to catch the fish, and also to stay grounded on purpose, because it's very, very easy to lose the path. So the idea is to do both, is to learn to teach how to catch the fish, and also to instill this sense of purpose, this sense of higher attachment to something higher. So, so this is what we try to do with the Centro Sergio Vieira de Mello, which is based in Rio de Janeiro. And we have some partners that are working with Model United Nations. And using Model United Nations, we are doing some of these activities today via Zoom, and having an influence in that way.
Thank you. Thank you. I think this is going to be our last question, because if I'm not wrong, this session is going to end in about 14 minutes. But Luca Idiar, who's a student at Cultura, would like to ask a question. Would you like to unmute, Luca, and ask your question?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Hello, Carolina. I just wanted, first of all, to tell you that after hearing you in this meeting, you're a big inspiration for me right now, because you're doing all this great stuff out there in the real world, and we are from the same community. I mean, we are from the same city, so it's really inspirational. And one of my biggest dreams is to go to college to the USA. And my question is, which advice would you give to someone like me to commit my dreams? Thank you.
Lucas, thank you so much for making this question, and thank you so much for placing yourself out there. That's the first thing you need to do. Go out there, go and ask.
That's to go.
That's the first step. And if you can ask it in English, that's even better. Sometimes it takes as little as that, as being curious and posing the question in the right language. Sometimes it's as basic as that. And knocking the door. You need to be ready to knock the door. And you need to be ready to not take yourself too seriously, and seem like a fool sometimes. You need to feel like a fool. It's okay. We are all fools. We all make ourselves the fool at some point, and it's okay. That's how we learn. That's how we learn. If we had been born knowing everything, then I don't know if you know anybody, but I don't know. I had to learn everything in life. So, you know, my advice to you and to anybody wanting to study in the US is a little bit haphazard, like it happened to me. You know, we place ourselves goals, and then life kind of takes it, you know, that direction. So you have to have your purpose pretty much somewhere there, but kind of be open to improvise along the way, and be open to know that the path is not straight, that there's going to be a lot of twists and turns. But if your purpose is right and you're tuned to your purpose, you'll get there. You'll get there. No doubts about it. You'll get there. And to study in the US is what you're doing now. You know, you speak English, you learn English, you ask questions in English. You are not afraid of asking questions. The way I did it is I wasn't lucky to have all the saints aligned and all the items aligned. And I think that very few people actually, you know, can say that they can have that. You know, I had to work, and I had to work in something that I would have never done in Argentina. I wouldn't have been babysitting in Argentina or in Bahía Blanca. Can you imagine? But if I went outside, I could do it. This tells me it's like, why wasn't I able to do that in Argentina? Because I was also full of prejudice. You know, we are people of prejudice, and now, you know, I say that looking back. But at I think that the one advice is, you need to be curious, and you need to be open, and you need to be looking for opportunities. My opportunity came when I did this trip, which led into an English course, which was supposed to last a month, and then it lasted 3 months, and then it lasted 6 months, and then it lasted 5 years, and then one thing led to the other, and I was also very flexible. You know, I always say that I lived in an apartment that had 3 windows and no light. I had light from 12:30 to 12:50 at noon, because then it was dark all day. Of course, I had no windows. That was beyond my budget. So there's a lot of trade-offs that you have to make. Yes, I couldn't live in a nice apartment. I actually had to live with 5 different people. I didn't have privacy for 10 years. Yes, maybe if I had stayed in Bahía Blanca, I would have been able to live in an apartment on my own. But you need to make trade-offs. But if you're ready to make those trade-offs, if you are ready to, to relinquish some things for that higher purpose, and you're ready to, go and work and study, and maybe work not as the intern of one of your father's friends, but really work in some place where you go and you knock the door and you make yourself a fool for a little while. That's how you'll actually you'll be able to make progress. In the US, one of the things that was for me non-negotiable was that I needed to, I was going to a public university, but the public university in the US was still paid. I had to pay. Of course, I didn't have to pay like the big fancy universities, which I later went to. But at the beginning, I didn't go to the fancy university. I went to the cheap university. But then I was able to sell the story to the fancy university, and they took me for free. Because I like my story.
That's a silver lining there.
Right. So basically, there's always a silver lining, and when you forge your way, at least you have a story to tell. And universities like that. Universities like that a student shows them that they didn't have everything served into a silver tray and hand it to them. The last thing I will say is that there's a different rationale in the US as in Argentina. The rationale in Argentina is that you need to have the money, and if you have the money, then you pay for university and you get in, and that's fine. And in the US, is a reverse. The good universities, if you have if they see you, if they see in you a good candidate, they will search for you. They will catch you. You'll be like a client to them. And what you need to show is that you are worthwhile, that you are a candidate that is that will add value to their university. If you can show that, then they will offer you a scholarship, because you will add the value to the realm of students, to the group of students that they already have. So that's where it comes into play, of having real experience and then showcase your experience. That would be my advice to you.
Wow. I think we have all learned a whole lot from that last answer. Thank you so much, Luca, for having the courage of putting it forward. And thank you, Carolina. It was totally insightful. That's all we should be telling our students every day, and our sons and daughters as well. Rodrigo, remind me, how much time do we have? Do we have time for a last person to say goodbye to Carolina? Okay. Too many questions. Okay, okay. The idea we were finishing 8:30. Thank you so much, Rodrigo. Anyways, I mean, it's actually probably very tiring for you, Carolina. We don't want to overdo it. Marisa wants to say a few words, and I think that then we can call it.
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I couldn't find the speaker. Carolina, it's been such a pleasure. You're, I don't know, it's overwhelming how much we learned about experience, about real life. I'll be brief. It's not my style, but I'll try to be brief. But Sandra knows me. What can I say? I'm not interested in pursuing a career. I'm over that in this stage of my life. I just want to ask a question, and that question is, how can I be of service? Because I think that has to do with my purpose in life. And so my question to you, what I'd like to get from you is, if just to tell me if we could go on with a conversation, because I want to be of service and I want to be in touch with you, so we can engage in further conversations to go on being of service. I think that has been your purpose, and I think my purpose is there, very, very close to that. So thank you very much. It's been, I don't know, a real pleasure. I've been listening to you with my 30-year-old son here, right next to me, and we've enjoyed it, really. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marisa.
Thank you so much, Marisa. Thank you.
I'm from Bahía Blanca, by the way. I don't know if I told you that I'm from Bahía Blanca, but I've been living in La Plata for many, many years.
I am too.
And but I never forget Bahía Blanca. You know, we are always Bahienses.
We love it.
Right. Okay. Very much for everything. You're such an incredible person. Thank you.
I think you all have been very generous with me, very, very generous. I really, really thank you. And I invite Marisa and I invite everybody to look at least perhaps in what we are doing at the Centro Sergio Vieira de Melo. There's a website, sergiovieirademelo.org. We have an account on Instagram at Centro Sergio Vieira de Melo, and we are also on Twitter at Sergio Vieira de #8. So that's one, just for starters, the things that we are doing there. And I think we have a lot to do. I think definitely we have a lot to do.
Many things you said resonated with me, because I've always been learning. My life is about learning, you know. And one of the latest things I've been doing was becoming a coach, an ontological coach, and that has a lot to do with understanding life and communicating better and managing emotions, and that has a lot to do with getting real contact with people, right? And I think we have a dream. I think you have the same dream as I do, and that is that a lot of elements that we know should be within the syllabuses of in the formal education, right? Communication styles, how to live your emotional world, finance, how to You know, those that should be included in basic education, right? And it's not anywhere in the world. So, okay, it all starts with a dream.
Yeah. Thank you, Marisa. I think that you're opening so many paths in what you're doing, what you're saying, that we could be here. Sorry that I'm being a bit, I mean, I want to close this up because I think we've been having Carolina for like 2 hours, and it's, you're extremely generous, Caro, but I think that the time over exceeds, and I think that you're opening paths that would require probably another meeting. And I'm, you know, a kiss to you because I, you know, I hold you dear to my heart, but I really need to close this down. Then there's the Georgina Santos says that this was a wonderful talk and that you are very inspirational, Carolina. I want you to know this before we close down. And then there's Monica that wishes to have your email. I suppose that you can perhaps write it on the chat if you wish, if you want, or perhaps the organizations. Martina Oresti, who's also a student at Cultura, says, thanks, Carolina, for the interesting talk. Marita Mancini says, thank you very much. Inspiring token. My prayers for your brother Alejandro. Georgina keeps saying thank you. And this is about it. There is the email, rosalarriera@gmail.com. So you can contact Carolina and perhaps be, you know, more into what she does and the enormous work that she's doing. Rodrigo, would you like to finish off the meeting? No? Yeah, it's I just I don't know. Yeah, you go ahead. Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, we can all hear you very well, Rodrigo. We wish to thank you, Rodrigo, me talking on behalf of Cultura Inglesa, because it was actually your, I mean, this was your drive all through, and we appreciate it enormously. And obviously, thank you, Carolina, for accepting Rodrigo's invitation and linking us, you know. It was a huge pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for staying with us these 2 wonderful hours. I think that we are going to brood over, you know, there's a lot to think about after the talk. Thank you.
Thank you very
So
much.
goodbye, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you,
everybody, for-
Carolina.
I
You're
really-
wonderful.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Marisa.
Thank you, Sandra, for the invitation.
Thank you for being here, Bernardo. We really need more fathers like you. Bernardo is a father of one of our, I mean, 2 of our students, and
Yes.
we really
What
appreciate
to
all your
tell?
help.
What to tell my daughter if to study when she is 16 right now? What to tell her about going to study abroad when she is 18, or to continue studying in Argentina and working here? What to suggest
What
her?
to suggest? What
It's
should
my
we say?
question. I don't know.
Let's cross fingers.
It's a big
things
deal.
Get better, I think.
I went abroad. And I worked my way. I worked my way. It can be done. There's a lot of sacrifice.
Yes,
And
but you were a daughter. I am a father.
Yeah.
So what to tell my daughter to do? What to suggest? She is thinking about going abroad to study when she's 18. Not to continue study here in Argentina, but continue studying abroad. I don't know where. But your opinion was very important. I think other person asked the same question as I was thinking about, and it was very important to hear you, Carolina.
there is sacrifice. There's a lot of sacrifice. It's not easy.
For sure.
But at 18, also all the doors are open.
Yes.
So if you don't do it at 18, when will you do it?
That's the point. Yes. After some years, you can consider to come back to live where you want, perhaps in Bahía Blanca or wherever.
You can always do what you want. I think as a father, I would say, give the wings to your daughter
Yes.
with responsibility.
And English is very important. I agree with you. It's fundamental.
It's a door. It's the best investment you can ever make. And I'm not saying I'm not getting paid by Alianza. I'm not getting paid by
No.
But it's definitely it's the best investment that she will never regret. On the contrary, it will expand her toolkit in such a way that will give her access to everything and anything. And she could have that access from Bahía Blanca and from Montermoso if she wants to.
Now she's thinking next springtime to go to Montermoso.
She's planning that.
Planning that.
That's her plan, of course. Let her enjoy that.
Have fun too.
Yes, of course.
Yes,
of course. We've all been there.
Well,
okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure. I hope we can continue talking, Carolina and Rodrigo, to thank you particularly, but I think we should call it a day. It's really very late. Thank you enormously.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for staying so late, and thank you
it's a
for
pleasure.
listening to me and my little story. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Sandra. Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you, Agustina, and everybody who made this possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Bye.